Back live with Paul McGee, author of Apple in China, and he believes that Apple's bet on China had massively boosted the country's tech sector. Our next guest, though, Paul Trielo from the DGA-Albright Stonebridge Group, disagrees. He says McGee's book misses the point on U.S.-China ties. So let's get to the man himself. Paul, great to see you and appreciate your time. What do you disagree with in Patrick's book?
Well, look, as I agree with the general thrust of the book in terms of how Apple has been sort of drawn into this very complicated political situation in China. But I think we have to step back and note that the Apple story is part of a much broader sort of 20 to 30-year process here of optimizing supply chains in Asia. Not just for Apple, but for many, many other high-tech companies. And a lot of offshoring of manufacturing, for example, from the United States and other countries to the Asian region. The other thing that we have to also account for here is some unexpected developments here. Patrick does a good job in the book, noting that how surprised Apple was at the success, some of the early success in China. And we have also the rise of two very, very critical companies in Asia, Foxconn and TSMC, but that was not sort of, preordained here. I mean, the success, for example, of Taiwan's, the TSMC foundry model in Taiwan was not, nobody really thought about that in the 25 years ago, and now that's sort of an obvious thing. But the problem there is that the success, for example, of TSMC and the success of companies like Foxconn really are a huge part of the story. And again, I think Patrick really draws out that story also nicely in the book, because really it's hard to conceive of, for example, Apple's success in China without Foxconn and without TSMC. So it's really a much more complicated sort of geopolitical landscape out there that I think we're seeing. And then again, I think my one concern is that the book, it sort of extrapolates that China and the U.S. are bound for conflict. And so therefore, for example, some of the capabilities that Apple has trained, Apple engineers have been training Chinese engineers on how to do automation. I don't really agree that that's that easy to transfer that knowledge into military advantage or military hardware. That's a really complicated issue. A lot of the factors in the manufacturing of consumer devices don't translate that easily into, for example, manufacturing advanced military systems. So there's
Patrick, let me bring you on this. I mean, that is one of your main contentions, right? Apple, because of its success or through its success, has put China in the position today, right now, to be able to militarily threaten Taiwan with some of the technology that it's learned.
I wouldn't, to be fair, it's actually not even mentioned in the book, so it's not one of my main contentions. It's something that's come up on interviews. And I think Paul's comment that you've been putting on the Chiron, was really based on an interview. And I do say a lot of interviews where I'm trying to put 400 pages into a 90-second soundbite, I think two things have happened there. One, people think the book is more anti-Apple than it is, when in fact basically all my sources are Apple, and it's sort of a rah-rah saving Apple narrative, at least for the first 100 pages before they walk into this different crisis. And people think it's more anti-China than it is. I don't view China as like a country that you shouldn't trade with or anything. The issue is the vast consolidation. I mean, Apple has made a quarter century worth of investments here, and it's the only country where they've made those investments. Nothing else comes close, right? Tim Cook has estimated that there are 3 million people in the supply chain on behalf of Apple's partners working for assembling its products. There is no country that comes close to that. So it's the consolidation into China as it has become more belligerent and authoritarian. So you don't have to treat Apple you don't have to treat China like this great adversary, although I would treat them like that. But even if you just understand them as a great rival, and obviously the biggest rival in terms of their economy and everything else, it's a strange position for the world's most valuable company, an American company, to have put all of its eggs into one basket. That is really the risk there. And I really don't think it's much of a leap at all to say that if you are building electronics at the level, the quality, and especially the scale that Apple builds at, we're talking 250 million iPhones a year, to use those skills, to use those production lines, to use that know-how, the attention to detail that Apple inculcates in all of their suppliers, to use that for other areas that involve electronics, what we call dual-use technologies, including military weaponry, I don't think that's a leap at all.
So, Paul, then, with Apple being one of the greatest American companies and its supply chains being so embedded in China and some in Taiwan, would you agree with Patrick's thesis that Apple is Beijing's bargaining chip now?
Again, I'm not sure that that's really that's again probably too simplistic a twist, and I doubt whether Patrick is trying to make that point. I think it's a two-way game here, right? I mean, just as Beijing has some say and some control over Apple. Apple, employs a lot of people in China. It brings all these advantages in terms of helping train Chinese engineers on advanced manufacturing. So it's not as though both sides are not benefiting from this. I think it's important to note, though, this is a conscious strategic decision on the part of Apple here. Apple sort of knowingly exchanged the potential competitive risk here for greater control and efficiency and scale in supply chain operations. And so, yes, the overall Chinese ecosystem has benefited from this, including potentially rivals like Huawei and Oppo and Vivo and others, because of the sheer numbers of engineers trained on these technologies. But again, Apple has gone to great lengths to make sure the ecosystems there are able to support its advanced manufacturing, and it's taken some other measures to protect its long-term IP through patents and trademarks and other things, and also being able to continue to innovate and develop new products and new experiences, and as Patrick noted in the book, also moving into services and other areas based on the large install base of iPhones. So this is a very it's an interesting question as to whether Apple could do this anywhere else. India comes to mind here, but India is a very complicated place to do business. The other thing that's I think maybe missing, and maybe just because I haven't read the whole book, China has built an export-oriented ecosystem, infrastructure that is designed to support this kind of high volume, high manufacturing production. And India, for example, has not done that. India is very complicated to do business. So anyway, China is the only place where this probably could have happened. But I think it's sort of mutual capture here by both China by Apple and Apple by China.
Yeah. So, Patrick, how do you react to that? And perhaps you can fold in your advice to the Apple management and for the Trump administration who wants to bring manufacturing to America.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, let's put it this way. First of all, the reason why this book is an expose is because Apple doesn't want anyone to be talking about any of this, right? I mean, this is the sensitive underbelly of the company. If this was just beneficial to Apple and China and didn't have what economists call negative externalities, then when Tim Cook pledged to invest $275 billion into Chinese factories in May 2016, he would have held a press conference from Zhongnanhai. I argue that would have been corporate suicide, as Donald Trump was campaigning for president at the time on an American First platform. So, I mean, you've got to understand that, yes, this has worked out for Apple. Yes, this has worked for China. But I think the longer term winner here is probably China, because the longer term loser is probably America, probably NAFTA, Mexico, and India, because none of these other countries are able to succeed, right? I mean, China's model of capitalism is not based on shareholder dividends and profits. It is based on command and control, taking over industries such that rival nations actually get deindustrialized by China's success. I mean, that is the threat here. So I'm not arguing that it wasn't good for Apple's margins. It was incredible for Apple's margins. I'm certainly not saying it wasn't good for China. It was incredible for China. It just wasn't good for all these other partners. In terms of what Apple should do next, I honestly think it's an almost unanswerable question. When I say in the subtitle of the book that Apple has been captured, I really mean that they do not have some great strategic move. They cannot move to America for any number of reasons. I mean, literally at least 20 reasons. They really probably can't move to India, and if they can, it's a 15-year effort. And Beijing has China over a barrel. I'm sorry, Beijing has Apple over a barrel and can just prevent them from making the strategic moves they need to. So I think Apple is very much stuck. I'm fascinated fascinated by what they do next, but you'll notice that at WWDC today, they did not mention anything about China. This is not the issue they want people talking about, and it's because it's a really sensitive matter.
Fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.